Uncanny Doll by Doug Vogel. There is a world made of bodies that are not bodies, figures assembled from blocks, fragments, hinges, joints, a shape that remembers being human. In this world, nothing is whole. Everything is trembling toward form. Matter is waking up. Matter is dreaming. A figure that hangs from strings, not suspended, listening, as if the strings were not a mechanism, but a thought, a memory, an unconscious impulse pulling the limb into motion. The body here is not biological. It is a cabinet of hidden compartments, drawers that open from the flesh, revealing the secret life of desire, fear, shame, and the memories we store away for another day. It is a machine operated by the unconscious, a symbolic engine, a body that moves without hesitation because nothing inside it interrupts the arc. No shame, no doubt, no ego. Humans fall. Something almost human does not. We stumble over our own self-awareness while this constructed body moves in perfect circles, unburdened by the weight of choice. In this world, the mannequin is never dead. It is matter on the verge of consciousness. A second body, a dream body, a body that waits for us in the half-lit space between the animate and the inanimate. The uncanny lives here, the familiar returning in a strange form, a face that resembles ours but without breath, a body that mirrors us but without life, a figure that stands in our place when the psyche fractures or expands. These beings are containers, vessels for emotions too intense for the human body. They hold the early wound, the first absence, the longing that precedes language. They are the first other, the first companion, the first double, the first object that survives when the self is not yet strong enough to stand alone. And so we enter this world, a theater of suspended bodies, assembled souls and silent doubles, to understand something about ourselves that cannot be spoken directly, that cannot be seen clearly. In this world of suspended bodies, the figure begins to reveal something else, not its structure, but its condition. A constructed form does not move. It is moved by memory, by habit, by the invisible weather of the psyche, by forces that do not announce themselves, but pull the limb into motion with the quiet authority of a forgotten command. Figures jerk forward. They halt, repeat, restart, as if the body were caught in a loop written long before the scene began. The object as other, as body, is not free, but it is honest. It does not pretend to choose. It does not disguise its compulsions. It simply follows the arc that has already been drawn for it. And yet, there is a grace here, the strange purity of a body unburdened by self-consciousness, a body that cannot fall because it does not know it can, a body that moves without shame, without hesitation, without the tremor of being watched. Humans stumble because we interrupt ourselves. We hesitate. We remember. We anticipate judgment. We fall under the weight of our own awareness. But the suspended form is liberated by the very string that we fear. The string is not control. It is release. It frees the body from the burden of choice, from the paralysis of self-scrutiny. And so the object as other becomes a spiritual figure, a mirror held up to the human soul, showing us what we were before the fall into consciousness and what we might become if we ever found our way beyond it. The mannequin, too, begins to shift. It is no longer a figure of wood, cloth, hard plastic. It is matter in metamorphosis, trembling, fermenting, caught between object and creature, between dream and waking. This is the second body, the dream body, the mannequin body, the version of the self that appears when the psyche moves from its own accord. The human body is erotic, grotesque, and also sacred. The other forms here holds the emotions the human body cannot bear. It carries the shame that has no language, the desire that has no outlet, the memory that has no witness. And somewhere in this suspended theater, the uncanny begins to stir. The familiar returns in a strange form, a face that resembles ours, but without breath, a body that mirrors us, but without life, a double that stands in our place when we cannot stand in our own. This is the threshold, the place where the assembled object stops being an object and begins to become a question about the self, a question about the wound during the period of the Oedipal complex, a question about the early absence that shaped the body long before it knew its name. We are approaching the hinge, the place where the symbolic world begins to echo something lived, where the child's doll silence begins to resemble our own. There is a movement somewhere in the middle of all this, when the lifeless figures stop being a symbol and begin to resemble something remembered. Not clearly, not directly, but as a feeling, a faint pressure from the past, a shape returning in the dark. Because long before we knew these figures as art or theory or psychoanalytic metaphor, we knew them as companions, as stand-ins, as the first bodies that stayed when other bodies could not. Every child invents a way to survive the early absence. Some choose blankets, some choose animals, some choose dolls, others choose silence. And some, without knowing why, surround themselves with figures that cannot leave, and they show up in our lives. This is the hinge, the place where the symbolic world touches the lived one, where our early assembled objects reflect stillness and begins to echo the stillness we once needed, where the mannequin's blank face begins to resemble the face we once searched for as a child. It is uncanny, but uncanny is not frightening when you are young. It is an outlet for something once familiar. It's simply a second life. It is simply a second life inside of us, inside of the body that listens, the first body that waits, the body that does not turn away. And so we return to these figures as adults, not out of nostalgia, but out of recognition, because somewhere inside of us is the memory of a room, a place where the objects were alive with emotions we could not yet hold. The assembled forms become the vessel for the fear that had no language. They become the container for the longing that had no witness. The object as other becomes the body that could move when we could not. And perhaps this is why these figures endure, not as toys and not as curiosities, but as early architecture of the psyche. The first companions of the wounded and split child, the first doubles of the divided self, the first bodies that taught us how to survive the absence that shaped us, that lingering longing that still exists in each of us. In the end, the constructed body is not an object. It is a memory, a remnant, a fragment of the early self that never stopped trembling. And when we look at these suspended figures now, these block-built suspended others, these assembled souls, these silent doubles, we are not looking at art. We are looking at the first language we ever spoke, a language made of wood, of cloth, of string, blocks, plastic, and longing for that which was missing. A language that says, I was here. A language that says, I survived, and that I was not completely removed. And so I return over and over again. And the other shows up in that which is not there, in something that could not be seen, in something that could not be heard. There is something alive in all of us. There is something in me. There is something in me that has been waiting a lifetime, waiting to be seen, waiting to be heard. Humans stumble because we interrupt ourselves, we hesitate, we remember, we anticipate. But here, in this language made of wood, blocks, and longing, we have survived. Something in all of us survives and lives on.